Good evening and welcome to the Channel Studios here in London with your international news around the world in 5. President Alexander Lukashenko has accused Western countries of trying to strangle Belarus in a televised address. Lukashenko defended the handling of the forced landing of the Ryanair flight on Sunday and accused those who criticised the action of crossing red lines and abandoning common sense in their attacks on Belarus. Meanwhile, the country's authorities have released a second confession video showing the girlfriend of the opposition journalist Roman Protasevich. In the video, Sofia Sapega admits she was the editor of a social media channel which disclosed the personal information of Belarusian law enforcement personnel. Prosecutors in New York have convened a grand jury to decide whether to indict former US President Donald Trump on criminal charges. The jury is expected to consider evidence gathered during investigations into Mr. Trump's business dealings and the alleged payment of hush money to women on his behalf. Last week, the top prosecutor in New York State said that the inquiry into the Trump Organization was now a criminal probe. Mr. Trump denies any wrongdoing, alleging a political witch hunt. The United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in Egypt on the second day of a regional tour to bolster a ceasefire reached last week between Israel and Hamas. The top US diplomat pledged millions in aid to rebuild efforts in Gaza that he said the US would ensure would not benefit Hamas, with whom Washington labels a terrorist organization. It's after 11 days of Israeli bombardment that began on May the 10th, killing at least 248 Palestinians. Polling stations have opened across Syria as voters head to cast ballots in an election that is set to cement a fourth term for President Bashar al-Assad. The presidential vote is the second since the beginning of Syria's uprising-turned-war a decade ago, a conflict that has killed hundreds of thousands of people and forced millions to leave the country. Western powers describe the vote as a sham, as the election will not be free and fair, saying it will not represent any progress towards a political settlement. WhatsApp has filed a lawsuit in Delhi against the Indian government over new laws that the company says may end privacy protections in the country. The new law requires social media companies to comply with authorities' demands to identify message senders or the first originator of information. To comply with the law, WhatsApp would be required to break its end-to-end encryption of messages, both for those who send them and those who receive them. Meanwhile, a powerful cyclone with winds gusting up to 140 kilometers per hour has begun making landfall in eastern India. The cyclone, which has been named Yas, has killed at least 2 people in Odisha state and forced more than 1.2 million people to seek shelter. The Indian Meteorological Department classified Yas as a very severe cyclonic storm. It is the second to hit India within a week. According to media reports, Mali's interim president and prime minister have officially resigned. Bar Noor and Mokhtar Ouane have been detained since Monday evening at a military camp outside the capital Bamako. The officer who led last year's coup and became vice president of an interim government, Colonel Assimi Goïta, accused them of failing in their duties and seeking to sabotage the country's transition. Reports of their resignations come as Western Africa mediators visit the country, hoping to organise their release from military detention. South Africa's former president has pleaded not guilty in a corruption trial involving a $5 billion arms deal from the 1990s.
You have followed the charges that have been put to you now.
Jacob Zuma is facing 18 counts of racketeering, corruption, fraud, tax evasion and money laundering. Mr. Zuma blames political enemies in the governing African National Congress Party for his legal troubles. Mr. Zuma was South Africa's president from 2009 until 2018, when he was forced to resign after a vote of no confidence. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the Channel Studios in Lagos.